Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Automox Hands-On IT podcast, the show where we break down the tools, tech, and tactics shaping the day-to-day lives of the people keeping modern infrastructure running. As always, I'm your host, Landon Miles, and today we're talking about something that's quickly becoming foundational in the world of AI and IT. So, MCP servers or Model Context Protocol servers. So before MCP, everything was pretty fragmented. You'd have an AI tool that could answer questions, but it have no real way to reach into systems that you used every day. And it couldn't pull the right data, run the right actions, or understand the context behind what you're trying to do. So even with AI in the mix, you were still bouncing between tools, copying information from one place to another, and doing a lot of the heavy lifting yourself. MCP was created to close that gap. So today we're going to explore what MCP servers are, the problems they solve, where they came from, and why the open source model matters for IT teams. A little bit later in the podcast, we're also going to interview Henry Smith and talk about the Automox MCP server also. So what are MCP servers and what problems do they solve? So let's start with the basics. So MCP, Model Context Protocol, is what it stands for. And it's a tool that gives an AI assistant a standardized way to interact with tools, systems, and structured data. So instead of custom patchwork integrations or a lot of custom glue holding this together, holding your AI integration together, the model gets a clean, predictable interface with defined permissions and clear boundaries. So again, before MCP, this was a little bit messy. Every vendor had its own approach. Every assistant had custom adapters. Every environment had its own style of code. Nothing was consistent. MCP servers address that by giving you a predictable integration pattern, a permissioned boundary between systems and the model, a standard interface for tools, data, and workflows, a shared language across vendors and environments, and a simpler path to using AI for operational tasks. Think of it as replacing dozens of different dirt roads with a well-paved highway. Now, let's take a look at the brief history of the MCP. MCP originally came out of Anthropic. As they built out more capable AI assistants, they ran into the same problem the rest of us face. You can't scale real world automation if every tool and system requires handcrafted integration. Their teams needed a protocol that gave models structured context, safe access, and clear permissions, all without exposing sensitive internal systems. So Anthropic started by designing an internal framework. But instead of keeping it locked behind closed doors, they made a strategic decision to open source it. So they released MCP as an open community-driven standard. That meant that anyone could work on it, vendors could implement it without approval or licensing, and the ecosystem could grow faster than any single company could push it. Organizations could also adopt it on their own terms. And because MCP is built in the open, it didn't just solve Anthropic's internal challenges, it created a shared protocol that the entire industry could rally around. So today, MCP servers exist for logging, configuration management, talking to your calendar, cloud resources, documents, and a lot more. And the community is expanding the ecosystem at a rapid pace. So, what does this mean for IT and security engineers? Consistent automation workflows. So, you get one standard way for models to interact with your tools, not 20 different ones. Safer, more audible AI integration. So, MCP servers form a hard boundary. Models never talk directly to the underlying infrastructure, it just goes over that MCP layer. It also makes for better decisions through real-time context. So, with accurate system data, AI assistants can provide more useful recommendations. Also, faster rollout of AI-driven operational tools. So you can build or adjust an MCP server to match your environment instead of waiting for vendor-specific integrations. And no vendor lock-in. This one's huge also. So you're not tied to one AI vendor. You can use any model that is using the MCP protocol, that is using the Model Context Protocol. So at Automox, one of our favorite pastimes is asking questions, experimenting, and building things. Recently, one question that kept coming up is if AI assistants are already really good at summarizing data, writing scripts, and reasoning through complex text, could they also navigate through the Automox console on your behalf? So that question turned into an experiment, and like most good experiments, it led to a few more, eventually resulting in a working prototype. So Henry Smith was instrumental in getting this off the ground. So we spoke to him about that. Let's cut to that interview now. Welcome, Henry, and thank you so much for hopping on this podcast with us. We've been talking about MCP servers a little bit before this. Wanted to bring in kind of you as an expert. I know you'll be like, I'm not an expert, but we're going to call you're an expert in MCP servers. You've built one, and it's a really cool thing. So, like, talk to us a little bit about the use of MCPs, what they are, and kind of that a little bit.
Sure, definitely. So yes, I have been pretty, I guess you could say, intimate with MCPs and MCP servers.
He's an
Quite a bit.
expert. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Essentially, you can think of an MCP, or I think we already defined this earlier, model
Yes.
context protocol. It's essentially how like an AI can connect to an external system. So think about ChatGPT. Nowadays, like, that has the capability to connect to external data sources and even things like search engines, for example. So when you connect ChatGPT like to your calendar, you could then ask ChatGPT about your events, right? Or what's on your calendar. And that's because of that MCP client server connection. ChatGPT can then have all the context about your calendar to answer those questions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I think is super powerful about it. So we talked about this a little bit earlier in the podcast, but um, so Anthropic came up with the MCP standard and they open sourced it. So previously, if you wanted to have a model context protocol, it was kind of Wild West where you would have to do it if you had an OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini model, you would have to do it your own way. You would have to do it that way. So with this, it's open source. So Henry, you have been working on an Automox MCP model. It's a beta. We'll have a proof of concept of it releasing today. Actually, we'll have a GitHub link below in this podcast. You want to talk a little bit about how you developed that, kind of what you used to develop that, and the methodology behind that?
Absolutely, yeah. So full transparency, I moved really fast on the Automox MCP server. It was very much kind of an experiment. It was just an idea that the team and I had one day. It was like, I think we were actually using an MCP server for a different reason, and we were like, what if what if we could actually like connect this with Automox, and then customers could then ask ChatGPT questions about their console and then do things in their console. Like, this is a great
Yeah.
idea. And then I started to kind of do some research as for how to create your own MCP server. And there is tons of information out there. I mean, there's like YouTube videos, there's write-ups, there's official documentation. I think not I think there's definitely official documentation out there. And then one framework, you could say, in particular that I really like that we actually built Automox MCP off of is Fast MCP. And Fast MCP, I'm pretty sure is, I'm double checking right now. So yeah, Fast MCP was actually incorporated into the official MCP SDK.
Okay.
But now there's Fast MCP 2.0, which is like the actively maintained and production ready framework, and that's the one that we're using. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so kind of building out this, what were some of the challenges? Kind of, I always like to, when I'm solving a problem, I always kind of like to say, okay, like I want to be able to solve this one problem right here. That's my criteria for success, and then we're going to move on and expand it. So kind of what were kind of that first set of problems that you're like, hey, like if I could connect this to Automox and have the MCP work with it, it'd be really, really cool if I could do this. So kind of do you kind of have a list of those problems that you were trying to solve, or some of the things that you thought were really neat while solving while implementing the MCP?
Do you mean like use cases kind of for
Yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah. So like use cases. So whether it's report generation or being able to kind of talk back and forth naturally with the console.
Okay, yeah. So I'll say that when I first started building this, I I pretty much tried to mirror our API.
Hmm.
And as I started doing that, I learned that that was actually not a good idea. And then I
Okay.
started to actually see some supporting write-ups and blogs out there that were basically like, don't make an MCP server just wrap around a REST API. You should really try to curate almost like workflows that
Hmm.
that the MCP server can then use
Okay.
to help drive the MCP client, if that makes sense. So in terms of specific use cases for the Automox MCP server, some things we were thinking of, like you mentioned, report generation.
Hmm.
Being able to say, how many of my devices have, critical severity patches that are waiting to be patched, or how many of my devices are uncompliant or
Yeah.
non-compliant, things like that. Trying to think what else, even like executing commands, for example. So let's say you want to reboot a computer. You could say,
Hmm.
hey, Claude, I want to reboot, or please reboot, this computer, give it a host name. And then, if it doesn't find the host name match, it might find a partial match and then ask you kind of like some additional follow-up questions.
Yeah.
Health, fleet-wide health metrics, viewing policies, getting information on your policies. Another really exciting one is kind of asking, take a look at my policies that I have now, and then research Automox documentation. Like go to Automox's documentation and find best practices for
Hmm.
patch policies, and then give me like a write up or a report that shows, these are the policies that you have that could use these improvements, and here's the supporting evidence.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Very cool. So what was I always like to ask this, what was out of it, what was the thing you were most excited about when you were done with it? When you're playing with it, you're like, "Hey, this is really cool. Like I'm excited that this worked this way."
I would say honestly the report generation piece
Yeah.
that kind of blew me away
Mhm.
because honestly I didn't know that Claude was even capable of doing this. So for that specific test, and I actually showed this in the blog, but for that specific test, I hooked up the Automox MCP server to Claude, and
Mhm.
Claude also has other tools that Anthropic has included in there into
Yeah.
Claude. And one of them is, the ability to generate a report, or to, write code or write Python that can generate a report, which I think in the blog post demonstration is exactly what it did. So
Mhm.
like that blew me away. Like it was able to generate a PDF based on all the context that it gathered from my console, and like it was form headed nicely.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really mind blowing.
Yeah, that's really neat, and we'll definitely have the link to the blog in there a little bit also. So, you touched a little bit earlier on kind of not having MCPs just being a wrapper around an API. So, is that the thought behind that? Just kind of being able to is the thought behind curating workflows just being able to kind of have a better experience using the MCP instead of just having to be like, hey, use this API call, tell me information about it, versus kind of, hey, go get a patch report for all my devices, where it will kind of know the several different API commands that it can call. Or you want to go into that a little bit more, kind of what's the reasoning behind not just having a REST wrapper around
Right.
an API wrapper. So.
Yeah, yeah. So it really comes down to context. There's a context window that's
Hmm.
limited. And if you're kind of just shoving tons of data that's irrelevant into the context window, you're gonna see poor results. So for example, like let's say you have an MCP server and you have a tool, that does an API call, and that the response of that API call is like 20,000 lines or something. Like it's huge.
Yeah.
That could potentially, exceed the context window, or if it doesn't
Fill it up
exceed it.
really quickly with stuff that you don't necessarily care about at the time. So, yeah.
Exactly. And it's below, and it can kind of result in a poor user experience. And I mean, I could talk a lot about context if we want to
Yeah.
kind of pivot into that.
Yeah, sure. And
You
then
know,
so one of the things that you talked about in the blog that I do want to talk about context, but
okay,
wanted
okay.
to pick your brain on this one too. So one of the things you talked about in the blog was creating patch policies with the MCP. So to me, that's a really good use case for it because it's a complex workflow. I think
Yes.
you said patch Firefox or something in the blog, but I think let's talk on that one too a little bit. So kind of when how did you design for that workflow kind of within the MCP?
So I'm glad you asked this one, because this was an experiment in itself that actually turned out really good results. So there's a couple concepts with MCP servers to consider, like core concepts. So there's tools, there's I think resources, and then
Mhm.
I think prompts. And pretty self-explanatory. Tools are kind of like the actual meat and potatoes. Like think of like a post request. Like you're giving the ability to for the MCP client to like reach out and get
Yeah.
data, right? And then that's actually kind of a bad example, but then there's resources,
Hmm.
which is almost like a GET request. And with the patch policies, I struggled with that initially because, admittedly, the post body for creating a policy in our API is complex.
It is, yeah.
It can get pretty messy, especially, I mean, depending on what kind of settings you want to enable and what you want to do.
Yeah, I
So
mean, there's a reason that like GUIs are a good thing. So
yeah,
like sometimes, but yeah. So
yeah,
I mean, it can get really complex, like you're saying. But the cool thing about MCPs is that you can really programmatically address a lot of that complexity. I think. So.
yes, exactly. And so that's when I discovered resources. So I started with just building tools, and I didn't even pay
Mhm.
attention to any other the concepts. And I started looking into resources, and it was pretty much perfect because what a resource essentially does is it gives the MCP server more context. And here we go back to
Yeah.
context, but it kind of like arms it with the context that it needs to use tools, if that makes sense. So what I did was I created a resource, and essentially all it is just the like an example of a post body for the call to create a policy,
Hmm.
a working one, and it it can actually use that resource to help build a patch policy, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it becomes a
Yeah.
lot less error prone. Does
Okay.
that make
Yeah.
sense? Did I explain
That
that
does.
well?
That's very interesting too. And I mean, I think that's like the a perfect use case because I mean, even going through and auditing, if you're an organization with a lot of policies, if you have a complex setup within Automox or anything, being able to kind of just have another brain say, hey, like go look at this, go look at my policies, make a new policy that does this, or make sure my all my policies are optimized. It is very important. And then the other one that you used in the blog that you wrote that I thought was really neat was being able to view the activity logs for certain people. So
Yeah.
used our friend Mark Hansen in that. But yeah, you can so audit trail user activity within that you can say, hey, like pull this report from the audit trail, see what this certain employee has done in the last X amount of time, and kind of get a clean read out of that rather than having to I know that you security people love looking through logs, but rather than having to go look through the logs for each one of those. So, but I thought that that was a really neat use case also. So.
Yeah, that's actually one, of course, that I'm excited about being a security professional. And yes, just being able to like natural language say
Mhm.
like, what did Mark Hansen do like between these dates? Like, it feels like he's not doing any work. I'm just kidding, Mark. You're awesome. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
one I was really excited about, and I hope that we can kind of expand on the capabilities of it.
yeah, for
And
sure.
or
And to
we
me,
kind
one
of
of the, especially with MCPs, one of the powerful things is like, it's not, there's certain tasks that you do once every couple months that's like, oh, like, I wish I would have taken better notes last time I did that because I feel like I had to go learn this lesson 2 months ago, whether it's pulling the logs or kind of looking through those logs and understanding. It's like, oh no, found a way to do this really easily last time. I forgot what it was. But with MCP servers, it kind of takes a lot of the thinking out of that sometimes too, where you can be like, hey, look at these logs or do this one-off task that I did a month ago that I don't remember anything about now. So like, and it can be like, oh yeah, this is how this is set up, or you can have it look at something and kind of explain it to you also. So that to me, I mean, AI and MCPs is that's a great use case for it, is kind of being able to explain something that's complex. And I think that's what you've done a lot of with the MCP server for the Automox one, is being able to translate instructions to a complex instruction set of API calls. And yeah, I've gotten to play with it some, and I'm very impressed with it. And it's been a really neat thing to watch grow also. So
thank you. Yeah,
yeah,
we're really excited about it. And like I said earlier, it was very much an experiment, and it still
yeah,
is. I mean, we're gonna put a disclaimer on there that says, "Hey, this is an active development, and this is
yeah.
community driven and not actively supported," because it's pretty much just like a passion project, with all
Hmm.
of us here on the team. And um, yeah, we're just really excited about it, and just excited to see kind of how it grows. And we really hope to get community feedback as well. That
Yeah.
will make my day if that happens. So
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have any feedback, please go try it. Please let us know what you find.
yeah.
And yeah, and then, but yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Henry. Yeah, it's been really fun to watch this come together. So that wraps up our dive into MCP servers and how the Model Context Protocol is creating a cleaner, safer, and more scalable way for AI systems to interact with the real world. What started inside Anthropic as a way to tame internal complexity has grown into an open, community-built standard that's already shaping automation. So if you're curious, I recommend checking out the spec, checking out the Automox MCP server or other open source MCP servers, or even building a small one of your own in your own environment. The barrier to entry is pretty low. It's a lot of fun. And the upside is that it's becoming increasingly embedded and increasingly more useful in our day to day lives. As always, I'm Landon Miles. This is Hands on IT. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.